Hi guys, in this week's video I'm going to tell you all about my Cambridge interview day, which got me a conditional offer for modern and medieval languages, German and Spanish at Clare College in 2015. I'll do that right after the intro. So in last week's video I talked about how I prepared for my interviews. This week is all about the day of the interview and how the interviews were actually like. So the night before the interview I stayed in college in a room just like this. I had dinner in the Buttery, which was something very new for me back then, and it was really convenient because my first interviews took place in the same building. My first interview was even in the same courtyard that I'm in right now, and the waiting room for the interviews was in the library. So I got up, put my suit on. I don't remember exactly whether I had breakfast or not. It is possible that I had breakfast in the Buttery. I'm not sure anymore. But it's good to have breakfast before your interviews, a couple of hours before, so you can also speak without problems. So before the interview started, we all went to the library common room. It's a very common place to be. Now that I'm here, I know this, but back then it was another new thing. It's just a very cozy room where we stayed and met all the other interviewees. I wasn't very talkative back then and I spent very little time in there, but it was nice to see that there were other people in the same situation that I was in as well. So my first interview was my Spanish ab initio interview. Before going in, I had 15 minutes to read a poem in Spanish and make a few notes about it. It felt a lot like oral exams, oral language exams, and I was really familiar with those, so I instantly had a feeling of familiarity about it. And then after 15 minutes, the previous interviewee came out of the room and told me I could go in, so I went in. The first thing that struck me was how much one of the interviewers resembled my English teacher from back home, and the tone of her voice was also similar, and this contributed to the feeling of familiarity that I had. It really gave me a boost of confidence. The interview was divided into two sections, basically 10 minutes talking about the poem that I had read and 10 minutes about my personal statement or things that I'd brought up there, or stuff that is related to language in general and not necessarily text-based. The first thing I had to do was to read the first verse out loud and attempt to translate a bit of it. After that, we had a discussion about the possible meanings of the motifs found in the poem. It was a big advantage, I believe, the fact that I could speak a bit of Spanish here. I talked about the basic ideas of the poem in Spanish, and that was something that going to Madrid in summer allowed me to do. I really think that this helped me give a good impression that I'm really into the language. In the second part of the interview, I was asked more general questions. One was on linguistics and the difference between prescriptivism and descriptivism, and which one I thought was the better approach to linguistics. This also tied in with what I'd mentioned in my personal statement about Andres Bello and how he contributed to establishing Spanish language of Latin America, and also about Spain's King Alfonso X, who contributed a lot to establishing the Spanish language as language of culture and literature, and establishing it as more than a vernacular. So after we talked about this for about 10 minutes, that was it. That was my Spanish interview, and I thought I'd done pretty well. At the end of the Spanish interview, I remember saying something along the lines of the fact that I wanted to discover more about Spanish language and linguistics in the future, and the interviewer somehow alluded to the fact that I might be able to do that once I got in. That gave me a kick of confidence for my written exam and for the entire day, really. I was really energized by that, by her mentioning the possibility of me getting in. I went back to the common room, and that's where we were picked up for our written examination. The written exam took place in one of the upper rooms of the library. It now is a common place where I go and study, but back then I felt so privileged to be able to enter a Cambridge library. I was really excited about it as much as I was nervous about this written exam. I think I was more nervous about the written examination than about my interviews. Also because I thought that most of the other applicants are native English speakers and I'm not, and I thought that could prove to be a disadvantage for me, but in the end it apparently came out well. There were about 15 to 20 of us sitting the exam. We had 1 hour to write 2 texts of 1 to 2 pages each. I can't quite remember what text it was exactly right now, but what I had to do was write a stylistic analysis in the first half hour, and that's what I went for. The first, and because it was more of a technical analysis. In the meantime, I also gathered ideas for the argumentative essay that I had to write in the second half hour, which was a good thing to do because it was a way of optimizing the time. Also, before starting to write, I spent the first 5 to 10 minutes reading the text 2 times through, underlining what I found important bits to note, and I explained in my previous video what this stylistic analysis entailed in terms of content, in terms of exactly what we had to analyze, so you might want to check that out. After my written exam, my parents were waiting for me in front of the big gate of Memorial Court, which is the building of the college where the library is and where I set my interview. I met them and I was really confident that I'd done pretty well. They obviously couldn't believe it. They even took a photo of me, which you'll see right now, and this is how I looked like on the day of the interview. After that, I had lunch in the Buttery. The post-A-level German interview took place in Old Court, in the old building of the college, which is right next to the King's Chapel, which you might know. Before going in, I felt that this was going to be the decisive interview, the most important stepping stone. And it really was. It had more or less the same structure as the Spanish interview, but it felt like it was one level above that in difficulty. I was given a text to read for 15 minutes. It was prose this time, and then I went in. And whereas in the Spanish interview, both interviewers were very friendly and smiling all the time, this time one of the interviewers was a bit more serious and less talkative, didn't smile a lot. One was more serious, the other one was friendly. The other interviewer, fun fact, has been my German literature and culture supervisor for the last 4 years. The first thing I had to do in my German interview was to read the first couple of sentences out loud and then attempt to translate the first paragraph. The paragraph was quite difficult, and I had difficulty finding some words, although I knew how to translate them, but I was also a bit nervous. So the tactic that I employed here was to think out loud, say exactly what I was thinking, what my process of translating the text was, and in this way we could actually have a discussion on how some parts of the text could or could not be translated, and what the difficulties of translation are. So it really helped that I tried to say as much as possible of what I was thinking in my head without trying to create a print-ready translation orally on the spot. It's not what they expect of you, and it's a good thing to keep in mind. You should definitely say what your doubts are and explain why it's difficult to answer a certain question, because that in itself can be a very good answer, believe it or not. So after translating that paragraph into English, we switched to speaking German, and the interviewer, who wasn't smiling at all, started talking to me, and I got a bit nervous at this point, but I tried to keep smiling and maybe get a smile from them as well. So I had mentioned Thomas Mann and Günter Grass in my personal statement, and I later found out that this interviewer is an expert on Thomas Mann and Günter Grass. I'll even have some lectures with her this year. It's crazy when you think how little I knew back then about it, and still had to talk to an expert on the topic in the interview about it. It's good that I didn't know this, and it would have been a lot scarier had I known it. In any case, the first question was about Thomas Mann and the way history was portrayed in his novel Dr. Faustus. I had read the novel the summer before, and I knew some of the problems that were with reading Thomas Mann, but I was by no means an expert, and so I had to talk about the role of the historical times that the novel was written in, which was a really long period during the First World War, between the wars, and even a bit after the Second World War. So it's a really long period, and it contains both world wars. This is a defining aspect for the novel because the conversations that the characters have always relate to history in a way. And my point in the personal statement was that what fascinated me about German literature was the way it always linked to historical events and social problems. So the question was connected to my personal statement, but it was still quite difficult to answer because there's so much to consider when talking about history and literature. The second question was about Günter Grassy's novel The Tin Drum, or in German Die Blechtrommel. This time the question was about why the author chose an unreliable narrator to tell his story, and why at all we can characterize the main character as an unreliable narrator. This novel was another novel that I had read during the summer and mentioned in my personal statement. It was a bit overkill to mention these novels in my personal statement. I wouldn't do it again. I would probably choose different pieces of literature to mention that could be approached in a 10-minute interview or in 2 questions a lot better than these very controversial novels. Each of these novels has about 600 or 700 pages, and it was really crazy to mention them in the personal statement, but that's what I did because I thought my personal statement had to stand out, and this was one of the ways that I wanted it to stand out in. And I made the effort to read those novels, although I had spent the last 4 or 5 years reading German literature, and I had so many works that I could have chosen from, but I chose those. So after my German interview, I had the feeling that I could have given better answers and better arguments for my opinions, but at the same time I felt that I had given my best, and this was enough to make me feel at peace with myself. I knew that I'd given the best that I could have, and the result was then up to them. And I was still pretty confident, but I was not sure what was going to happen. In the evening I had dinner with my parents, and then over the next few days I visited Warwick, which was my second choice had I not received an offer from Cambridge. Although really my second choice was probably Heidelberg in Germany, studying Germanistic. That was what I was thinking of choosing in case Cambridge didn't offer me a place. Then we visited London for a bit and then took the plane back to Romania. The conditional offer to get 95% in my finals came at some point in January, so 1 month after the interview. The interview was on the 9th of December. I spent that entire Christmas waiting for the result, and it came, I think, via email first and then via UCAS. And I was really happy about it. I was confident that I could get the 95% in my finals if I worked hard enough. To sum up, it was definitely not the worst day of my life. It was a great experience. It was a challenge that I accepted and that I went through with enthusiasm. I know this is not the case for everyone. I don't know exactly whether it's Clare College that has this very friendly atmosphere, but I definitely suggest that if you're thinking of applying next year, you choose Clare College. In any case, I thoroughly enjoyed the interview experience. I loved the surroundings, and the interviewers were really friendly, and the fact that I got in is a bonus, and I'm really grateful to be able to study It's crazy how much time passed since then. So I would definitely encourage anyone, regardless of their social or educational background, to apply here and give it a try. I definitely felt put at ease by the interviewers. They helped me give my best. Okay, so I hope you liked this video and that it encourages you to treat the interview day that is quite possibly coming up for you as a challenge, and to treat it with enthusiasm and something to be looked forward to. And if so, if you liked it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up right down here and share it with your friends. Also, please subscribe if you want to see more of these videos. Okay, so that was my Cambridge interview experience. I'll leave you to some music that I made this week, and I'll see you next week. Bye!